Welcome back! Now we're going to be looking at a few of the different bits and pieces. Just go into my notes here. You can see that today we're going to be looking at setting up a HUD timer and getting that to move across the screen. We're also going to be setting up checkpoints in our game, so we're going to do both of those in today's video. If you've been following along so far, your game should have a start button, should have an enemy that can defeat us, as long as we touch both of them, and we get our really sad looking loot screen. We're going to add a little bit of additional complexity to the game now, so we're going to add that timer first and foremost. A timer is going to be a control object. What I mean by control object is it doesn't have a sprite associated to it. So we're going to call it obj_HUD for our heads-up display. Now this is really good if you've got any. This is a good dumping ground basically for anything that you need to record about the game in general. And one such thing that we're going to be storing there is going to be our time information, how long we've been playing the game for. So add an event, create an event, bit of code, and the code that we're going to be adding here is the record of how long we've been playing this level for, and I'm going to call that time. Time's going to start life at 0 because we haven't been playing the game for any time. What we're then going to say, wait for a period of time. We're going to use an alarm to record that. Wait for 30 frames. Remember 30 frames per second, so 30 makes sense. If you are going to change the frame rate, you need to make sure that that marries up to whatever your frame rate is. Now I'm going to take a copy of that, because as a programmer, I'm lazy and we can recycle our code if it only needs a bit of a change. So add a new event. When the alarm 0 goes off, bit of code, gonna look identical, but this time, instead of time being 0, we're gonna add to that a 1, and then we're gonna reset to 30. Again, you should be popping comments in here. I'm not, for expediency's sake. So what we should now see is that will keep a record of time. Next thing we need to do is to display it. If you remember from the previous video, when we added in our display, we know that we need this draw event to actually draw that to the screen. So I'm going to execute a bit of code. Because I'm going to be drawing text to the screen, draw text. Okay? Remember, it wants 3 properties as identified down the bottom here: x, a y, and the actual string we wish to display. So draw at my x, draw at my y, draw my object's position. Remember, if you're confused as to why I'm doing my x and my y, it's the whatever this object's x and y coordinate is. What we're now going to say is we're going to update this little bit of information. We're then going to say the string that we want. I want the word timer, a space, and then also I want to display what my time is. But if you remember from last time, time is going to be a number, whereas timer is going to be a string. So we need to say, I want this to become a string as well. So again, just pay particular attention to that. If you are looking on a small screen, just remember that we've got just regular brackets used in there, and there should be 4 in total, 2 opens, 2 closes. Got to put those both in my room now. I'm going to see what that looks like. Object HUD, going to put that on screen. Going to play our game. We should see that our timer is now increasing, so we're seeing that, but we are going to move off screen. Our timer is going to remain where it is. That's not going to be very good. What I'm going to do again here is I'm going to say this timer follows Mario, and the easiest way to do this is back to our code. When we draw it, don't draw at my x and my y. We're instead going to draw at Mario's position. Now, because I don't want to modify its vertical information, I don't want to modify where it is up and down, I just want to modify where it is on the x coordinate. What I'm going to say here is don't do my x, do player's x as well. obj_player.x. Get his x rather than my x. And play game. And what will now happen is as we play the game, it will follow us as we go, which is quite nice. You can also do this to tie into whatever views we're using, or we can do whatever we like, and that's an exercise for yourself to really tidy that up. That information will only stick per level, so if you have different levels, that as a technique will only work every time that the HUD is opened. Remember that the create event here, that means every time the HUD loads into a level. If you didn't want that, if you wanted it to last just once and to work once, you can instead change that event from a create into a game start, which I appear to have lost. Other game start, which lives there. So you could say once the game starts, you set this, and it just keeps incrementing. That's an option for you. A little bit fiddly, that one, but that works fine. So the next thing I'm going to look at is a little bit to do with checkpoints, and I'm going to go through this ultra quickly, but let's make it work. I'm going to create a new object here, obj underscore checkpoint, rather unsurprisingly, obj underscore checkpoint. And the idea of checkpoint is, again, it's going to be a control object. It's going to have very little itself. It's going to have no code for the time being. Checkpoint. And what checkpoint is going to do is we're just going to position that on the screen. I'm going to do this really quick. What I am going to do is the sprite I'm going to associate to it. You can associate any sprite. I'm just going to reuse my wall sprite that we've already got because it works so well. So I'm going to grab obj underscore checkpoint. I'm just going to put one there. I'm going to put one there. Again, even though it's the same sprite, very different objects. And if you're wondering for what object it is, if ever you're not sure which one's which, if you look just down in this space here, just that space there, when I hover over object, that tells me that's object checkpoint, that's object checkpoint, that's object wall, that's object enemy, and that's object player, etc. What I'm going to do now is we're going to store information in the player. Player in your games, when you start building them, they'll become very, very large events. There's going to be a lot of things in here. This is obviously a very, very small one at the moment. The reason why they give it this much space for events and this much space for actions, generally you're going to fill most of that. So I'm going to add some new piece of code for our create event for object player. I need to record where our player is going to jump back to when the player dies. We're no longer going to restart the game. We're going to jump back to the last checkpoint we travelled at. Start the game. He has crossed no checkpoints. So we're going to say just jump back to where the player started. So what we're going to do here is we're going to keep a record of where we started. I'm just going to have player checkpoint, and this is going to be relative to his x coordinate. So I'm going to say this is the record for x. Now there's a built-in variable that records where every single object started. Rather unsurprisingly, looks a bit like that. X start. Where did this thing start? What I'm then going to do is do exactly the same for y, again because I'm lazy and I'm doing this quickly. Copy, paste, change the bits that change. If you are serious about programming, get in this habit. And again, I would expect you to put comments in there. I'm going to comment that bit of code there because we are going to need that in a moment. What I'm now going to say is when the player collides with that checkpoint, we're going to update that information. We're no longer going to say, and I just did Control and V to paste that in, you can right click paste if you want to, the checkpoint X no longer becomes where the player started, it's now going to be the other thing's X coordinate and the other thing's Y coordinate. The thing I'm colliding with, obviously that updates that. Last thing I'm going to do here is when I collide with the enemy, we had a previous bit of code that said if my lives equal 0, go to the lose screen. What I'm going to replace that with, if lives equal 0, we're going to go back to a checkpoint. Now you could have a number of mechanisms to say, if I've done this a number of times, then I lose the game and it's game over. Or you could say that you go to a checkpoint when you touch one enemy, entirely up to you. But for simplicity, we're just going to replace it with this. And again, we'd update the comments to marry up to that. So what I'm going to say here is my x and my y. I'm going to say just these bits of code here. And again, for expediency's sake, I'm going to be lazy about this. I'm going to say my x now equals the player checkpoints x, and my y now equals the player checkpoints y information. So again, just that code there. Reset my x to that piece of data that we stored, and store my y to that piece of data that we stored as well. Let's play a game and see if this works. So just for testing, I'm deliberately going to avoid these two things here, and I lose the game by touching both enemies, and it restarts where I was. Because my enemies have been destroyed though, it hasn't restarted the level, it's just taken me back to the start. This time, I'm going to play my game again. I'm going to touch just this checkpoint here, touch that, and it restarts me at my checkpoint, which is fantastic. You could make those checkpoints visible or invisible, up to you. The problem here is with the checkpoint system, if you collide with both checkpoints, so if I were to do that checkpoint, it set it to the position of that one. If I then touch that one, it set it to the position of my second checkpoint. The challenge for you guys to find out is what happens if I go back. I'll leave that as an exercise for the reader, but have a play with checkpoints so you can get it to do. Well done.